I'm very happy. I'm so happy to have this chance to share with friends from China and international friends how we see the global economic situation and China's economic situation in the near or in some time to come. So the topic of my speech is not just about tariffs, because today we are at 2025 SPW. So from macro perspective, when we use a macro lens to look at PGMs and look at gold and silver, probably you have heard that money may not necessarily be silver or gold, but silver and gold are by their nature money or means of monetary means. What that means that from the very beginning, we have all kinds of different commodities, and one very special is money. However, throughout the history of mankind, money has been tied with a lot of things. For example, money has been tied with the trading, and money has been tied with the precious metals such as gold and silver and PGMs. So when we look at the platinum market or PGM market, I think that we have to take a step back. We have to look at the macro picture. Not only do we need to see the lines, the lines and charts that you see day in, day out. In particular, since the beginning of this year, given the major changes in China and internationally, if you read news this morning, probably you know by yourself that President Trump President Trump said that U.S. is going to impose higher tariffs on goods from a lot of countries, not just countries that belong to the category of emerging economies, but also countries in Europe and other countries that traditionally have been very good trading partners of the United States. So products from these countries, they will see tariff increase if such products are to be exported to the United States. So I will going to give you a macro lens when it comes to PGM outlook. In order to predict, you have to understand, and you have to understand where we are, how. I think understanding where we are is rather abstract. It's very simplistic to say that you try to understand someone, some company, some country, but if you manage to understand them well, you might be able to gather more effective information. Without deep understanding, it will be too simplistic for anyone to claim that that company or that country is not worthy of too much attention because they are ragtag of people. So this chart, this is something that have shown substantial impact on the economy and on the PGM. Vertical axis represent the negotiation cycle, and vertical axis represent the price asked for, and the horizontal axis represent the negotiation cycle. And there is the idea of pressure, extreme pressure. But do we see any pattern from this chart? Well, this is a chart that we managed to create based on how we analyze the person, he himself, what he has been doing over the past 3 decades to 4 decades. We analyzed all his trading behaviors over the past 3 decades, even 4 decades, including his trading of property as well as his trading in other fields. So we come up with this chart and we found some degree of relaxation. But does that relaxation represent the bottom, represent a conclusion or end? Based on how we analyzed that person, that gentleman's behavior, trading behavior of the past 3 decades or 4 decades, we don't think that the bottom, this is already the bottom or this is already the end. We do see that there will still be back and forth down the road. But again, about vertical axis, how do you see it? It can be the price asked for by the other party. You can think of it as tariff, or you can think of it as the price of PGM. If, say, a lot of things are a result of this reason, we need to have a clear understanding of the reason or the personal pattern. So that's why that this morning, instead of seeing any relaxation on the part of tariff increase, we actually heard that the tariff will be raised, but not as much as what that person claimed in the first half of this year. But again, that to some extent is related to how you see, how you analyze, how you judge the person's behavior pattern. But a lot of things is also related to the negotiation. In particular, during the first part of the negotiation, in the first half of this year, China showed a lot of composure. And something similar was also observed in the pattern of Korea. So that's why we say that the bargain, the game, is still ongoing. And I would like to also give you a simple explanation of a lot of problems faced by both sides, and in particular the U.S. side. After the globalization, after the fast globalization that we've seen in the past, a clear fact is that because of various reasons, people now have a new understanding of globalization. If during a pandemic period, a country was unable to produce even a mask, one mask or one ship by themselves, that undoubtedly represents a huge threat to their national supply chain. That's why we are seeing a lot of countries, including the United States, are trying to get the manufacturing industry back. And based on this strong logic, and we are seeing that since the beginning of this year, tariff imposition and tariff increase against other countries launched by the United States, as well as dollar depreciation against a lot of currencies in other countries, as well as the hard bargain driven by Mr. Trump personally. We think that there will be a certain level of relaxation. We don't think that we think that U.S. trade deficit will relax before the end of this year. We don't think that all these U.S. policies are correct, but we do see that they will contribute to their reduction of trade deficit. So we don't think that all the U.S. policies are unfounded. They do have their own reasoning to justify their policies. So by raising the tariff, they will see their trade deficit shrinking, but that will be too good to be true for them, because of such economic restructuring or economic structure adjustment. We think that economies as represented by the United States may face a situation of economy going downward. For many years, as long as the U.S. trade deficit shrinks, we do see certain degree of deceleration of U.S. economic growth, which means that it's fine that if you want to change your economic structure, but you have to pay for such change or restructuring. Just like the case of China, for years we have been adjusting and readjusting our economic structure, but in the process, as you may know yourself, we paid our due price. So I'm sure that in the process of economic restructure, U.S. will pay their due share of price. For one thing, their real economy will decelerate to a certain degree. But do you think that they know about this issue or not? My personal answer is that probably they have certain degree of awareness. Just like President Trump said that in the future, every U.S. family, their children should not own a dozen of dolls, a dozen of puffy dolls, one or two is enough. That means that they do have a certain degree of understanding. And if the U.S. were to readjust their economic structure, if they want to shrink their trade deficit is fine. But in addition to their real economy will grow at a decelerated speed, Wall Street and financial market will also have to pay their due share of price. Say, if the U.S. really strong or is keen on seeing their trade deficit going down, their financial surplus is undoubtedly will shrink as well. So financial surplus represents the money that flows into the Wall Street. So it means that if the blue line, which represents the trade deficit on the part of the United States, were to shrink, the red line, which represents the money flowing into the Wall Street, will also experience shrinkage in terms of the trend. But by the qualitative word of trend, which I mean, I cannot predict whether the U.S. stock market will go up or down today or tomorrow. It's about trend. And I think that President Trump delivered speech at a U.S. university commencement. So he delivered a commencement speech at one of the universities, and in his speech he used the sentence that you should think less about entering into financial speculation, but rather think about entering into the real economy, which shows that he's partial understanding that what he is doing will have certain impact on the financial industry. So it's about trend. If the U.S. were to change their economic structure, they have to pay, which will be reflected ultimately in the value of U.S. dollar. History always rhymes. History shows a lot of similarities. 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, U.S. also had a very high level of tariff, and during that period of high U.S. tariff, we do see that U.S. currency and how much it accounted for the global reserve also reduced. So today, the way we're seeing it today, we don't think that the U.S. dollar value depreciation is something that will end soon. It will be more longer term, and that means it will affect the price of precious metals, including platinum and other types of PGMs. And I think that's one big reason, one big structural reason accounting for why we have seen the price movement of PGM market since the beginning of this year. But we should not underestimate the Chinese people's resolution in getting their economy better. We should neither underestimate the resolution on the part of the U.S. people. If such resolution is not transitional, if such resolution is more longer term, I think the trend shall be more clear. And in this process, we do see in the world a clear process of de-dollar. It's more about making their portfolio more diversified, including the pursuit of different currencies and the pursuit of precious metal, representing one part of their effort to diversify their portfolio. So in this process, I think that looking back, when we look at the Chinese economy, objectively speaking, over the past decades, in particular in the process of the pandemic and after the pandemic, China's manufacturing industry showed strong resilience and showed strong competitive advantage. Despite the 145% tariff, which were then lowered to 30%, despite the high level of tariff, China's manufacturing export, on the whole, managed to maintain a strong resilience. But partly because of the trends export or the export via a third party, but still, even if we exclude such transit export, China's manufacturing still showed very strong resilience, manufacturing export. And such resilience supported China's overall strength in its GDP growth. So according to market consensus, in the first half of this year, China's real GDP growth has already attained 5% or even go beyond 5%. This is something that is worthy of no doubt.
So we could notice that for the H1 of this year, the GDP was already 5.4%. However, China still has problems. So this problem is more related to some proposals or some words proposed by the central government, or are related to Chinese people's feelings. I'm not quite sure for foreign friends. So it's more like the rat race. So I don't know how to interpret it in English. So it's a kind of competition. However, it's not a kind of very sound and healthy competition. So this competition can be seen from a lot of industries. So you can see a lot of industries, they basically reduce the price. So even if they have very good production, very good capabilities, however, the foundation is still about reducing the price. Everybody work hard and to produce. However, they don't make money. And if we go to see the profits of different industries and the profits, so from the trend, you can see that a lot of industries, they reduce the trend of getting profits. In the past 1 to 2 years, China's economy is very strange. If you see the actual GDP, you can see the GDP is very high, almost 5% above. However, in general, if you see the index of prices and the CPI and the PPI, and if you combine PPI and the CPI together, and you can see the overall price is downwarding continuously or even have the negative growth. So what actually happened? China is so much competitive, or we call this rat race. If we see, and for the experience of Japan in the past years, if a country experienced the huge adjustment of the real estate, so of course the prices are huge stress. Although from the planting industry, however, I wish you wanted to live, and I believe you wanted to live in a very good apartment. So any country, after adjusting the real estate prices, and then you can see the prices of all industries are on the downward trend, and the logic behind this is very simple, because to China or even to all the countries in the world, real estate industry without any doubt is the most important, or is one of the most important industries to drag up the economy. So if this industry is stressed hugely, a lot of the industry downstream upstream will be affected, and then for demand, the prices will be affected. So for Japan's experience of adjusting the real estate prices, we found out a very interesting thing. So for the decision makers from Japan, in the beginning, they didn't feel the negatives of going down the price. If the price is going up, and then the market would be clear out, and the consumers and the people, they can buy cheaper products. So after adjusting the real estate prices, so for the Japanese government, they didn't pay attention to the downward prices. Of course, they paid a lot of attention to actual GDP. If you feel the stress of actual GDP, and they got some stimulus, and they got some adjustment. However, this adjustment was not very big, because if the actual GDP achieved the target, it is not necessary to worry too much about the low price. So that's why in the past 20 years of Japan, we saw a very interesting thing. So when actual GDP dropped, and then there will be kind of the shorter-term policies and come and back forth, and we can see that from the actual GDP's perspective, and basically Japan experienced a very stable period. And if you look at the red line, and for the prices, the price is going down, and the price was very much related to profits of the enterprises and related to the money and in people's pockets. So that's why, and for this problem, if we from a macro picture, we would say, considering China's history and China's facts, of course, and China and has their targets, and we really care about actual GDP. And from this year, China also proposed that we needed to gradually drag up the prices. However, according to our observation, still, and there's a space, a long way to go, or a short way to go, I would say. So decisions and impact on the prices. So basically, we haven't seen the clear result. So we feel that there will be some reverse periodical policies, especially to the real economy. However, the policies are still very gentle. So actually, the central government proposed we need to stop and going down and keep it stable. And a lot of policies are very much related to real estate. So you can see in terms of the transactions and of the real estate in China, it's easy to do that. However, if you really wanted to reduce the stop the reducing of the prices, so it is still very challenging. And from the recent data and China's real estate prices, the downward prices, the trend is still going down. However, there's good news. The good news is that due to US, and they have the big adjustment of the structures, and for the investors and in the whole world, so they basically reallocate their resources, including the relocated resources in China. And we can see, and for the core assets, for example, like technology and new consumption, in the past several months, we clearly see that. So these industries were chased by investors. So we could see from the Asia market at the same time, and we would see that in Hong Kong market. So Hong Kong market basically has more and better enterprises from mainland China, high-tech companies and new consumption companies in Hong Kong. So this reallocation of the resources, so will this build up or raise up the prices of the mainland China, including the housing prices. So according to our observation of Japan, so the raise up of the prices, of course, and it decides on external factors, for example, the depreciation of the US dollars. So if the depreciation of the US dollars, and then a lot of the assets in the whole world will be supported a lot. Of course, the key is that is for the internal policies. For example, the expectations of the profits and the adjustment of the prices. So basically, Japan, they didn't took these opportunities quite well. And in recent years, and we couldn't see that China's policies changed a lot, without any doubt. And the central government invested more in the physical area, and then we could see a lot of changes of structures. So these changes will not happen in year 2025, and in the following 10-year plan, and we would still see that changes. So because adjustment of the real estate is still ongoing, and from the physical perspective, and we can see that we still need to do that in this reversion period, and we need to have more quarter and into the consumption. So of course, the government directly provide the subsidies and to the citizens. People will doubt. So because it will be overwhelming. So if in the beginning, and the government provided subsidies to the cars, so everybody only buy several cars, right? And the subsidies goes to the electrical products and like the home appliances, and then the subsidies goes to the mobile phones. However, all of this will not be stable, and because we are worried about the overdraft, and I'm not quite sure, and you have the experience. I'm in Beijing, and I buy from JD. I randomly order and some products, and then I saw I've got a 20% off because of the national subsidy. So from this perspective, I don't think this subsidy is a very long-term strategy, this subsidy actually is very huge, covering everybody in the country. Actually, Japan is different. Back to the past, in order to trigger stimulate consumption, and the government reduced the tax. However, so when the consumption power was not very big, so a lot of the tax saved by the netizen citizens. They didn't spend; they just saved this tax reduced. So based on the experience of Japan and for Chinese people, and when we sought out and the ways for the future consumption, and we can see that so the subsidies and of this year, and we could see a lot of subsidies and goes to like home appliances and daily used products. And we clearly see that for the industries which receive the subsidies from the central government, we clearly see that so they've gained a lot. So that's why for Chinese people, and we are willing to spend, but it depends how much subsidies we could get. So that's why, and this year we saw this, but for next year, and these subsidies switch to the service industry and to the other industries. So I personally believe that China's economy will be stable, but the key is that we still need to maintain and stabilize the price of the real estate industry. Of course, and all in all, and consumption is very much related to the income. So finally, I wanted to talk something about policy-related topic. So how do we cope with the policy? So in the past 2 to 3 years, we can see that the macroeconomy for China's adjustment, the ways are changed hugely. So you can see in the past years, or 5 years ago or 10 years ago, so the adjustment basically for that season or for that month, so then the economic growth was slower than the historical data, and we could see some short-term fiscal and currency subsidies or stimulus. However, and we saw these rules changed a lot, which means China's definition to economy and policies will be different. So doesn't mean so due to the economic growth and is slower than the historical data, and then there will be some short-term stimulus. So we are not doing that. So if the accumulated GDP growth and is slowed down, and then the annual GDP growth can be met, and then we could see and some reverse period policies. For example, last September 20th meetings from the central government. So due to the challenges and of achieving the goals set up in the beginning of the year, and then there will be very strong policies and for the reverse period. So to us, on the short term, we don't believe there will be a very big stimulus. So maybe at the end of Q3 or the beginning of Q4, there would be probably some big policies or stimulus. But for now, I can clearly feel that the adjustment of the structures are increasing. For example, the subsidies of parenting, the subsidies and of the other industries, or the central government proposal to go against this kind of vicious competition like this rat race, so which means limit the supplies of some supply end. So this limit, and because we have this side supply reform and in year 2015 to 2016, so maybe and for this year there will be some limits on the supply and then the stables. Then we would stabilize the prices, and it is also very important to the policies due to the time. This is my brief introduction, and finally I use two sentences to summarize my report. We talked about two things. The first is that we talked about our standings to tariffs and our understandings and to President Trump's policies. So, but this is not only his personal behavior, but more importantly, so when we understand President Trump's behaviors, and when we understand, so they adjusted these economic structures and reduce the trade deficits, and the U.S. they get a lot of benefits. Of course, they paid for it. So, including the downward of the economy, and then they need to compromise the U.S. reserves. So if they do this firmly, and then we believe the value of the dollar direction will be adjusted, and on the long run, of course, to platinum market, from the objective perspective, I think this is good to the platinum market, because for the relocation of the global resources, and people will pursue secure resources. So that's why, like I said in the beginning, so currencies are not the gold and platinum, but gold and platinum and silver will be like the currencies. So my understandings and to China's economy, this is the second point I covered. So especially since this year, China's economy was getting up. Of course, there are a lot of highlights of different industries, but the shortage is that the prices or the CPI, PPI are still at low prices. So when we face these challenges, we can clearly feel that for the demand end, so there's still some power and some motivation, but maybe it will wait till the end. And China's government, so from the supply end, and the government started to have limitations to go against this vicious competition. Of course, and to me, these limits will be very hard behaviors. So because we still need to rely on the demand to get out of these low prices, but we clearly see the central government, they started to go against this rat race, this vicious competition, and to some extent, and it will help to stabilize the prices. So that's, I believe, in the future, we will not be too optimistic or too much pessimistic. So we will be more objective to the future. Thank you.